welcome to this week's episode of the Python People podcast. And this week we are extremely lucky to be joined by a very special guest in Paul Davison. So Paul, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Pleasure,
Paul,
absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No worries at all. No worries at all. Paul, you are, for those people that haven't had the pleasure of your acquaintance as of yet, you are the head of data for the Royal Mail. And we got chatting, I guess, over the last few weeks, and invariably we seem to, whenever we end up speaking, we seem to go off on various tangents and spend a lot longer talking about things than we initially planned. So we thought, do you know what, let's do a podcast.
Very, very true.
So
let's record some of our ramblings.
Absolutely, you never know, there might be some gold in there for some value for others. So yeah, we spoke quite a bit about different themes and that kind of thing, and I think one of the things that kind of cropped up for us both, I guess, in the times we're living in right now, you know, with everything that's going on with the pandemic and COVID and just people's kind of social awareness in general, but just how data is playing quite a big part in you know, kind of social change and social impact. And I know one of the areas quite, you know, of interest to you and quite close to your heart is about the whole concept of data for good. So we thought that could be quite an interesting theme to have a little chat around. So I guess, you know, in the first instance, when we sort of talk about data for good, it's one of those kind of hot topics. It's one of those buzzwords, I guess, that's seen around, you know, people wearing t-shirts saying data for good on and all that kind of thing. But, you know, when you kind of think about data, I guess, in the way it's perceived in society today, what do you think people generally feel about the topic of data in kind of in these times, in these days we're living through? How do you think it's kind of perceived by people at the moment?
I think it's a really interesting question because I think it's got multiple layers to it. So I think you've got the view of let's say society, so data subjects, you know, people that have data about me. So I've got my view as a kind of consumer or a citizen. And then equally, you've got the view within businesses as well. And I think that business layer is also segmented in terms of size of organization. So if I look at larger organizations that have probably very good access to data, may have people who are experts in the field, you've got an angle around data for good. And I always frame this in a way that says, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So there are lots of organizations that have data available about their customers, their prospects, and there's lots of things that you can do with that data. But I would argue that there should always be the question linked to data ethics about whether you should do what you potentially could do. And
Yeah.
I layer that even higher than you know, the legislative side of things. It's more about making sure that it's looking a bit wider than that. So it's looking at, are your data subjects going to be surprised if they found out that you were doing something? And that's a good barometer, and obviously, you know, part of legislation as well. And then I think you go down to the kind of smaller enterprises, smaller businesses. And this is where I think there's a real genuine challenge. And what I mean by that is we've moved to a world where it's very clear under GDPR what people should and shouldn't do with their own data. It does also outline what they should in terms of, in order to remain compliant, what they should do. But actually, I think it's created a kind of fear and inertia in the marketplace, particularly in that smaller area of the businesses where, you know, on a Monday, I might be the ops manager. On a Tuesday, I might be doing the cleaning order. And then on a Friday, I might be writing a marketing plan. So, you know, Wednesday afternoon's data slot becomes quite tight. And actually, I think nervousness around what people can and can't do with their own data often creates an inertia that means that they don't do anything. So, you know, there's the desire, there's the legal framework that makes it arguably easier to do the right thing with data. But actually, that kind of fear factor often actually prevents people from doing what they might naturally want to do. And I would argue what the market is out there to help them do. And that's things like, you know, real basics like keeping data accurate and up to date, you know, cleaning it, running regular hygiene. You know, for me, that is that's data for good in two angles. It's data for good because it's good for the organization in terms of compliance and, know your customer, all those kind of things. But it's also really good for the data subject. If you roll back maybe, I don't know, let's go even further, 10 years back, we were doing a lot with data as organizations, and we were getting very clever with what we were trying to find out about people. We were seeing some really smart, personalized marketing, and it's data driven. But
Mm.
actually, I think particularly in that smaller area, in terms of size of business and maybe specialist knowledge, I think people have actually got really nervous about that. So you could argue that we've kind of stepped back, and this is where I go to my kind of third layer. And this is about data for good for me as a citizen stroke consumer. If I'm receiving really targeted, personalized communication that's been driven by, good use of data, that for me is great. I actually get a better customer experience. If we've got parts of the market, parts of organizations that are maybe nervous, maybe not feeling as confident as they have been to do that, arguably my experience as a consumer might be worse. So there's a marketing level. I think there's also, from an organizational perspective, there's a bit of a wider picture in terms of, data can actually benefit society. There can be tools that are available. There can be data sets that can make things happen in a safer way, a faster way. So I think it's a phrase that, you're right, it's bandied around. But I think it means an awful lot of different things to different people. And
Mm.
that's why I get really quite excited about it, because I think if you can apply it to almost everything that you do. So you can apply it in the commercial world, you can apply it in an ethical sense, you can apply it in a society sense and a citizen sense, and actually there's some really cool things that you can do if you just allow yourself to have that as one strand within everything that you're talking about within your data strategy. So yeah, as we often do, we go off on lots of different tangents when we talk, but hopefully that just gives you a kind of framing as to where why I'm quite excited about the expression and what it could mean.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's so many layers to what you've mentioned there, and so many kind of different angles and different nuances within the whole concept of data for good, and kind of what it means to average Joe blogs versus what it means to, a company and that kind of thing. But I guess what kind of struck me when you were talking there as an overarching theme is that data, it is more prevalent in today's society as a term. It's very much used in people's vernacular and all that kind of thing a lot more, and people are starting to realize that the power that data has. And I guess when people start waking up to something that has that much power, it suddenly starts to become very emotionally charged in one way or t'other. So you can either look at it in a very positive way in terms of the positive impact it could have, or again, you kind of look at it when you think of the examples of kind of data ethics within the likes of quite public examples in the likes of like Facebook, the misuse of data and things like that. It suddenly becomes a very evocative, a very emotionally charged subject for people, and I guess average Joe blogs in the world today probably falls on one side of the spectrum when they think about data. Do people feel actually this is going to be enabling my customer experience, enabling my life for the better, or is that very much that guarded, well, you're not having my data, this is mine?
Yeah.
It's interesting how that has evolved, I think, and probably only really over the last sort of few years, I think.
And actually that's the point, because I think I've kind of painted a bit of a picture of maybe changes that have happened recently are preventing people to do those things. But you're absolutely right, from a consumer perspective, as brands, as marketeers, as people who've got any kind of touch points around data, we've got a responsibility to look after that. And you mentioned the point about recognizing where data can be very powerful. In doing so, a consumer is quite rightly going to identify that their data is very valuable. So it's important to understand about that value exchange. But fundamentally for me, again, without trying to spin into yet another kind of side road, it's about making sure that everybody is transparent. So whenever we do anything with a consumer's data, or arguably a business data, it's about being transparent. You know, if you're clear about at the point where you're capturing that information, if there's a transparency, if there's a clarity that's easy to understand and people know what's going to happen as a result of that, and let's call it a transaction. You know, that for me, that is what people should be striving towards. And I think that actually will build on people's confidence to say, it's okay. Yes, people have got my data. And actually they're going to use it responsibly. They've been transparent about what's going to happen with it once I've shared it with them. Obviously, within, you know, the framework of GDPR, give people the reason to be able to, you know, remove their permission. And I think if we go there, then we actually could start to build confidence rather than necessarily a suspicion. And, you know, the headline examples of data breaches and, you know, where companies have not done the right thing, obviously they don't enhance that feeling of confidence in the marketplace. But I think it's, you know, it's our responsibility to do that as brands and as data people, to give and try and build that confidence with consumers.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think
to do that, go back to the kind of subject.
Yeah,
it gives us build that opportunity to actually strive towards that, doing, you know, using data for good, but for the good of the people that are giving it to you.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, yeah, totally hit the nail on the head. I think it's about, it's building up the proof, the kind of, you know, the cases, the kind of, you know, what can be seen as, you know, genuinely life or socially positively impacted uses of data. And I think the more of those that occur, you know, the more people's opinions will be changed, thankfully, hopefully for the better. But yeah, I guess with that in mind, you know, some of the examples of data for good projects that you hear about now in the world that exist, I mean, they're so, you know, fantastic, some of them, and genuinely extremely life-changing, you know. But I guess where we are right here, right now, we also have to look at, you know, this is a very reactive situation that we're finding ourselves in terms of reacting to a global pandemic. And as much as you can have these kind of really nice, innovative, you know, sort of long-term visions for how data can impact the world in a positive way, I guess where we all find ourselves right now, it's also thinking about, okay, what kind of initiatives can we implement right here, right now, that can help us navigate through this quite tumultuous time that we're all living through. So I guess within your remit and your kind of team and your strategy at the Royal Mail, have you, what sort of initiatives have you got in the pipeline, or that you're planning to embark upon, that could, you know, technically fall under that data for good category?
Absolutely. I mean, this, as we've mentioned, the subject is far-reaching. You know, data is helping a lot of organisations make sure that they're getting the right support and help with obviously what's going on at the moment. You know, there's a communication strand in there, so we're helping people identify areas that might need emergency communications, and you know, that's something that is often data-driven. So it's a real kind of nuts and bolts. You know, what do Royal Mail do in the core? Data obviously is a big part of making sure that that works. It's very laser focused in terms of its you know, its purpose, but there's some wider things that are more around, you know, well-being, but well-being of all sorts of areas. So well-being of our wider employees. So if you think about, you know, Royal Mail, in doing what we do, we have somebody walking down, you know, the driveways, the pathways of, you know, every household in the UK. And that presents an opportunity for us to make sure that we do that in the safest way possible. So there's all sorts of things, you know, there's about data capture around hazards, you know, and that's obviously going to help from an internal perspective. So, you know, that's broadly saying there's a health and safety aspect, and, you know, that will apply across multiple different industries. But then it's also, can you take a wider picture to that? Can you actually step back and go, because we capture it, could we actually make that process safe for other people? And as I said, it's you know, we're not there yet. We've got, you know, a long way to go, and I'm working with colleagues across the business to understand what that might look like. We've got a couple of other opportunities. You know, if you think, again, this is kind of pipeline thinking almost. But one of the things that I was fascinated about was, if you look at the fleet that we have on our UK roads, you know, there's some information that we can capture as a result of that happening in the wider world. And I was very curious, and it's something that I unfortunately haven't had a great deal of time to explore in the detail that I'd like. But you know, if you could monitor what traffic flows look like, journey times, maybe pollution levels in the pre-COVID, during COVID, and then obviously as we come out of the lockdown situation, and you know, what kind of benefit could that give? You know, what insight can you build from that? Maybe to help with future planning, maybe to help with, you know, just, you know, we are going to live in a very changed world in the future. And I think there's an awful lot of this data that can be used to try and benefit both businesses and also the consumers, who are often the end recipient of what is a core service. So
Mm.
that, yeah, there's an awful lot of things that I think insight's really interesting. And you know, everything that's happening in terms of you know, managing the whole coronavirus situation, there are things that have been put in place in order to try and, I mean, track and trace is an example. I'll avoid going political on anything, but you know, if you just look at a pure data angle, there's an opportunity to do the right thing with that data, but you've got to do it right.
Mm.
And you've got to capture it right, and you've got to, it comes a little bit back to my transparency point. um, if you're transparent about what you're going to do and why you're capturing that information, people will hopefully see the benefit. But in order to do that, you've got to explain, and you've got to be really, really clear. And I think often that is, I mean, we've got technology, you know, people who work in data understand that we can crunch vast quantities of data at speeds that, you know, we haven't been able to do in you know, even recent past. And it's available, it's accessible. But you've got to make sure that you explain, you bring everybody involved in that along the same journey.
Yeah.
And equally, if you are ever capturing data, do it in a way that opens up opportunity to do the right thing with it, whether that's for the business or whether it's for society. And that starts from, you know, it's the design of any programs around data capture. And I think it's important to, again, just have that angle that, you know, well, what does this look like as an opportunity for doing something for the good of society with what we're capturing here? Um, and if that's just there in the background, be it a checkpoint or whatever it might look like, I think that actually presents some real opportunities for the industry, but also I think society as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting point, because, you know, as a leader in data, I guess, you know, you are at the helm of the ship in deciding many ways the strategy the business will take around their kind of data focus. And I guess you've always got, you know, not the angel and the devil on your shoulder, but I guess you've always got, you know, the business needs, the business demands, the stakeholders, the board, etc., to answer to ensure that you're facilitating the needs of the business as best as possible. But like you said, at what point, you know, where does this data for good angle sit within that, in terms of how much of a you know, sway does it have potentially over the way you prioritize your projects? Or, you know, is it something for you that, when you're sort of prioritizing your different projects and your roadmap, you know, does it play a part in terms of you know, what you would choose to do next? Or what sort of factor does that play in? How do you balance those two things out, the kind of altruism versus the reality of running a high performing business?
Do you know what? You know, the way that you've kind of articulated that just illustrates the challenges, and they're always there. I mean, my particular area within Royal Mail is about the commercialization of data. So I've always got something I'm striving for that's going to deliver a benefit to the business. I mean, so that's there. But I think, as somebody who you know, tries to support other areas of the business in kind of data initiatives, I will always try and just position that thought that even if you don't want to do something now, just make sure that whenever you're designing something, that you're doing it in a way that enables that to happen in the future. Because I think it's really important that not everything that a business will do will have a data outcome, and certainly won't have a, you know, this is a strand of, be it a product, be it a service, be it an offshoot. that has, at the beginning, a thought that actually, yes, we could utilize what we're doing here from a data perspective to do X. However, if you've got people within the business, and I think in terms of when you look at what to consider in running any kind of initiatives around this space, it comes down to, even if you don't have an intention to do it at the beginning, if you have that in your mind, that there is a possibility that you could use the data that you're capturing through whatever you're doing in some way in the future that could benefit either the business stroke, your customers, your prospects, to retrospectively think about that becomes very difficult. And again, I think it just helps with that whole compliance, that transparency, and the data ethics standpoint. It's just about being clear at the beginning. And if you get it wrong, and you're very clear at the beginning, and actually in being clear and transparent about what you might be doing and what might happen out of capturing this information through whatever source it might be, if by going through that process you've actually finding that you're struggling to see what you want to see, whether it's from an insight perspective, whether it's for planning, whether it's even for commercialization, then actually that's a good barometer to say, okay, so if in being transparent my data subjects have a concern, then actually maybe I shouldn't be doing it. And I actually think that's okay as an outcome, because I think, again, it's very easy to get very focused on what you or what the business wants to do, and it's really important to continuously challenge that to ensure that we're all getting better at doing the right thing with data. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's always going to be something that is a challenge. If I were to take something out of that, it's that get people on board from the beginning and get them on board at every level.
Yes.
Because people understand what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it, all across the organization, not just within the specific area. It's a lot easier as you go down the line to explain why you might be doing things in a certain way. So again, it's just about getting that buy-in, that engagement, which, I mean, to be fair, it's standard kind of project management approach to things. It's stakeholder management. Yeah, it's not rocket science, but it really is. It applies in a really strong way in this space.
Yeah, I can fully understand that. I think, like you said earlier, the communication is key, and arguably more important than the technology in many ways, ironically, for building a data for good project. But it is bringing people on that journey. It's winning the hearts and minds. I guess it's like you said, it's just good business acumen and good soft skills. But I can imagine in this kind of potentially emotionally charged world, it's as important as anything else, really, to get that piece absolutely right.
And I think the soft skills are vital in this area. As data people, we're good with numbers, we're good with data. Zeros and ones make sense to us. It's very true. But the soft skills are so important to be able to just articulate and explain what sometimes is quite complex, but doing it in a really understandable way at the required level through, the whole kind of, if you're building a business case or anything like that. And I think actually, if you have an opportunity, and I'd relish to have this opportunity to talk about an opportunity to use data for, something that is good for society, then that's a really exciting place to be, because then I think it's easier to align if you're in a business that can do that. I think that's something that should be embraced when anybody has an opportunity to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, it's a really fascinating subject, and I think it's something that thankfully it does feel like a kind of a movement now, and something that's kind of here to stay, and hopefully, like you said, with more examples that we can start layering on top of how data can genuinely really make huge social change for the good. Hopefully, we can sort of continue on that trajectory, and data for good will become a thing that isn't just a buzzword anymore, but actually, people really identify with and get behind. And, it's not just again, down to a small department in a business, but something that's embraced by the whole business and society in general. So yeah, I find it fascinating, really. But I guess I'd like to end, if I may. But I mean, I always like to ask the guests to maybe share their number one lesson or kind of number one takeaway from their personal experience. And I guess, if it's anything related to data for good, fantastic, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. But is there a particular kind of take-home message that you'd like to share from your experience?
It's a great finishing question. I'll probably answer it stepping away from the data for good, as you say, buzzword strapline. Um, and this applies in the data space, I think, and lots of people will say in other areas as well. But I think really, really clearly in the data space, never assume that the people that you're talking to understand not just what it is you're trying to do, but also why it is as well. And I think one of the things that in terms of a lesson, and this is often when engaging internally as much as it is externally, if you live and breathe data in what you do, we find it very easy to understand why you might want to be trying to do something. We also find it very easy to understand what it is that we're trying to do. But actually, if you're not in that space, take the time to step back and try and explain it, I don't know, to your other half, to my 11-year-old daughter. And if they can understand it and get it, then you're probably going to benefit, if nothing else, just from the process of having that kind of thought process to get yourself to just go, let's hit some traffic lights here, take the time to understand it and understand what other people might be thinking or actually assuming. So yeah, there you go. Never assume. It's probably a life lesson, actually, but
Yeah, I think it's an absolutely great life lesson to share, because I mean Simon Sinek is one of my favourite kind of authors and public speakers. He's very much a la mode at the moment. He's everywhere, but one of his adages is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And it's so true. I think very often people are less concerned about the what and they're more concerned about the intention and the why. So if you can sort of take the time to explain and really rationalize that and bring people on that journey with you, the what becomes a little bit less, still important, but a little bit less significant, I guess. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, completely agree.
Superb. Well, Paul, it's been a fascinating chat. Thank you very much for sparing your time. There's some really great insights in there that really got my mind churning. So yeah, thank you very much for being here with us today. And yeah, we look forward to catching up on another one of our rumbles at some point soon.
Absolutely. Let's do it again soon. Thank you for the opportunity.
No worries. Take care. Bye for now.
Great stuff. Thanks, Guy. Cheers.